Okay, today we're going to talk about tanks. All of them, actually. Because most people who play Overwatch don't really seem to understand what a tank's job is. And how they're meant to do that job, because they all do it slightly differently. What is being a tank about, ultimately? Controlling space and denying the enemy team damage. And all of the tanks do that slightly differently, because they all have different kits, unsurprisingly, though there is overlap between them. So, we're going to talk about all the tanks, and what they do to control space, and deny the enemy team damage. So let's start with the obvious one, Reinhardt, because when you think of a tank in Overwatch, Reinhardt is probably the hero you think of first. So how does Reinhardt deny the enemy team damage and control space? He does it with his shield. Unsurprisingly. Reinhardt has the best shield in the game because it is the healthiest shield and it is the most easily moved shield at the same time. Irisa, second best shield in the game, slightly under half HP, but you can't move it freely, it's cooldown gated. Reinhardt can just move it around freely. So, you give your DPS unobstructed, uncontested lines of sight is a better way to put it, because you've got a soldier, they've got a soldier, their soldier doesn't have a Reinhardt, your soldier just sits right next to you, he gets to shoot at the other soldier doesn't get to shoot at him. Your soldier wins by default because there's no way he can logically lose that fight. The other way that Reinhardt, and the way Reinhardt controls space is basically by moving around with the shield, because the thing is also, Reinhardt doesn't have a very large zone of threat because he is a melee hero. However, the zone of threat that he does have is extremely threatening because he does a lot of damage to somebody who gets in melee range. Because he does 75 per swing and 100 off Fire Strike. And then if he's got Earth Shatter, his zone of threat is also a giant cone in front of him, but that's getting a little bit more out there. So, the way that you control space as Reinhardt is you tell your team to stand behind you, and you are gonna walk them to the objective. Not always straight to the objective, because some maps, that's not really feasible. Something like Hanamura, what you do is you try to usher them into, like, the side room on, if you're attacking. You try to usher them into the room on the side, and then you just cover them as they go through, so nobody takes damage as they pass through. The enemy team, they don't get to do any damage, there's no risk of somebody getting picked off, and they don't get to generate any ult charge off of it either, because they're just damaging your shield. And you just block them while they run in, then you come out the other door, and you're in a better position, and then you start walking towards the point, and the enemy team can't do much. So use your shield and your very threatening zone around you to just walk your team from cover to cover to the objective. Reinhardt is a bodyguard, basically, which all of the tanks are fundamentally, but Reinhardt is quite strictly a bodyguard. He is melee range with a very powerful shield. He only can really help people who are, like, right next to him. He's not very mobile. So you just sit with them, your team, and you bodyguard them. And then, the issue that, the most common mistake with Reinhardt players is they wanna do damage. They wanna get in there, and they wanna swing their hammer at people, and they wanna kill people. You're not allowed to do that in most situations, and your tank, shockingly, a tank's number one priority is protecting their team, so that should come above all else. Even if you're in the middle of a team fight, quite often, rather than swinging at people, you will be better off just holding your shield up anyway, so that your team just can't take damage because there's a shield in the way. And then they can't lose the fight because they can't take damage. At least on paper. I think of playing Reinhardt as kind of like being a chain chomp from Mario, basically, because your job is just to kind of sit there in an area and look at people menacingly. And you have a very clearly designated zone of threat, which is basically right next to you. And if somebody comes into that area, you pounce on them, and you fucking kill them, because they weren't allowed to come into your area. And then, person's dead, they left, whatever, you just go back to looking menacing in your area. And realistically, a Reinhardt should not end up doing that much damage over the course of a game, because your number one priority is blocking damage. Reinhardt goes oh, I've got gold damage and gold eliminations, what the fuck, DPS? Yeah, you're actually trying to play a DPS, but you're actually Reinhardt. You're probably not making any space for your DPS, which is the issue of why you have the gold medals. But, so that's Reinhardt. Reinhardt's a very straightforward tank like that. So then, the one directly adjacent to Reinhardt in, job is Irisa, because she is the other shield / anchor, tank, bodyguard, however you want to designate them. So, Irisa also has a shield. She has the second best shield in the game, because it is the second healthiest shield in the game. Winston's is quite fragile, so he doesn't really count as a shield tank. And the thing is with Irisa, though, is that she does not have the same zone of threat that Reinhardt does, because Reinhardt, very small zone of threat, basically right next to him. Irisa, not very threatening, right next to her. She is kinda, because it's easier to hit your projectile weapon on somebody that is right next to you. But Irisa typically doesn't want people to be right next to her, because she has limited ways to actually deal with that, and limited ways to actually protect people who are being dove on, other than to just kill the person, basically. Irisa is not a frontline tank like Reinhardt is, because Irisa does not have the same presence that Reinhardt does. Irisa's not scary enough by herself to be up there in the front line. Irisa, her job is to sit with the back line. She's meant to sit back there with the soldier, with the Ana, with the Zenyatta, and she makes a bunker around them. You put the shield around them, and then suddenly, similar to Reinhardt, you give the soldier, the Zenyatta, the Widow, whatever, you give them an uncontested line of sight to the enemy team, which they should just win the fight, right? Soldier versus soldier, that yours has got a shield, theirs doesn't. Your soldier should just win the fight automatically, because he can't take damage, on paper anyway. And obviously this is in a vacuum, an actual game gets more complicated than that, but this is the theory anyway. So, Irisa, she's meant to sit with the backline, and she still bodyguards them. You keep an eye out, you like, somebody's diving on the backline, you try to help that person to the best of your abilities. You can body block for them, because you're still big, you're still healthy, you've got Fortify, you can use Halt to try and peel somebody off of them. Genji's diving in with Dragon Blade, you just yank him back on the child leash, something like that. And that's the thing, that's the difference between Irisa and Reinhardt. Irisa's presence is significantly lower than Reinhardt's. Her ultimate also is not threatening, which is another reason Reinhardt is threatening. Earth Shatter's very scary. Irisa has a strictly supportive ultimate. Irisa, similar role to Reinhardt, but she's more supportive than Reinhardt because she's not scary by herself. You sit with the backline as Irisa, and you help them. You make sure the backline is protected, and you make a bunker around them, and then you help peel people who dive onto them. And that's basically how you do Irisa. So then, the next closest to that is Zarya. Zarya is sort of in between the two. Zarya doesn't have the same presence as Reinhardt, so again, she can't really be the frontline tank, but she does have more presence than Irisa does, especially as she builds up charge on her weapon, because then she starts doing damage. So, the way that Zarya controls space and protects people is with her bubbles, but then she also just uses her damage as the other part of it, because Zarya, when she has charge, is very scary because she does a lot of damage. So, how you play Zarya sort of depends on what you think your team needs. If your backline is being extremely threatened, they're getting dove on by Genji, Tracer, Winston, whatever, Deva, your job is to sit with the backline and protect them, because you're their bodyguard. You put the bubble on the person who's being dove, and then you use your charge that you've hopefully built up to just bully the person away with just your damage and presence. Like, she doesn't have the same kind of threat that Reinhardt does, and she's not as sturdy as Reinhardt either, so she can't be the front line like Reinhardt is. But she's very good at supporting the front line because of her bubbles and her own damaging presence, and she's good at protecting the back line for the exact same reason. She bubbles the person dove, drives the person diving away. And if she's at the front line, she just helps her tank, like Reinhardt, you block the enemy Reinhardt's fire striking at your Reinhardt, you just block it with your shield, the enemy Reinhardt doesn't get any charge. Any ult charge, you get weapon charge off of it, which increases your presence. It makes Reinhardt's job easier. So, Zarya, higher presence than Irisa, not as high as Reinhardt, and also she's very damaging, and she's good at supporting people. So, where you position depends on the game and what your team needs in that game, but basically you support someone. Zarya is kind of closer to being a support than she is a tank, because she needs to be with other people to operate efficiently, basically, because otherwise one of her abilities just straight up does nothing. So you damage and shields, so somewhere between Reinhardt and Irisa in terms of overall presence. So, now these are where the comparisons start to get a little bit more strange, so we're just going to go over to Roadhog. So, Roadhog is viewed by most people as just being a DPS that has a lot of HP. Here's the thing with Roadhog. When you think about Roadhog, you don't necessarily think about damage denial. And you don't really necessarily think of zone control either, because you think, well, he doesn't have any shields, really, at all. He's just HP, he's got no armor. How does Roadhog control space? Roadhog controls space through sheer presence and damage alone. And kind of crowd control, because he is one of the few heroes in the game that actually has hard crowd control. Roadhog is very threatening, because he has the hook, which is extremely long range, and theoretically, if you get hooked, you should die. Either Roadhog should kill you, or Roadhog plus his team should kill you. So Roadhog controls space through sheer presence, because when you see Roadhog, that's scary, because you know if you get hooked, there's a very high chance you die. So that's how Roadhog controls space, through sheer zone of threat alone. And also, Roadhog's zone of threat actually changes as well, because this is the thing with Roadhog. His zone of threat is his hook range, right? But if the enemy team sees you use your hook and it doesn't do anything, for the next 8 seconds, your zone of threat shrinks significantly, because now your zone of threat is your right-click range and your left-click range, and then that's it, because your hook is no longer actually a threat. And then this is sort of the thing with Roadhog. Sometimes the threat of hooking is scarier than the hook itself. Because imagine this, alright? Imagine the enemy team's got a Tracer, and you're trying to make life difficult for the Tracer because she's trying to make life for your backline difficult. It's hard to hook Tracer because she's very mobile, and she's going to be paying very close attention to you as Roadhog because you're scary to her. Unless you're really confident you're going to hook her, it's usually better to not hook at all, because if you have your hook off cooldown, the Tracer has to play around the fact that your hook is off cooldown. She has to respect the fact you can hook her and just kill her, and that will make her play much more passively as a result. If you try to hook the Tracer and you weren't very likely to hook the Tracer just then goes, for the next 8 seconds, Roadhog is no actual threat to me anymore. And then she starts bullying your backline again, and she starts playing aggressively while your hook is on cooldown. The threat of the hook and Roadhog's damage is how Roadhog controls space. He does have some other options as well. His ultimate is one of the better defensive ultimates in the game, because enemy team is trying to start a fight, you go, no, I'd rather you didn't. I'd actually rather you just didn't have any kind of fight with me at all today, and I'm just going to push you away. Even just it denies certain ultimates. Genji tries to come in with Dragon Blade, you start ulting him. Even if he uses Deflect, that's wasting time on his Dragon Blade, so you're still controlling space and pushing him away. And even if he deflects it back at you, that's going to run out eventually, and then you just keep pushing him away. And he has the other way, which is after they buff, take a breather so that you can actually move, and you've got damage reduction down for it now as well. You can body block for people as well, which is important to remember, because most people just think of Roadhog as like, you're playing Roadhog, I'm playing a DPS. If, like, you're with your Mercy, for argument's sake, and the enemy soldier starts using Tac Visor, just stand between him and the Mercy. You're big. You're gonna take up the space. Like, he has to shoot you instead of shooting the Mercy. So even though you don't have, like, a shield in the same way that Reinhardt does, Roadhog's still a big guy. He's still got damage reduction, he's still got a lot of sustain because of Take a Breather. So you can still block damage for the other people. Though Roadhog largely controls space through sheer threat and presence alone. And that's how Roadhog controls space and denies the enemy team damage, just by being a scary guy. So then we get down to Winston and Deva, who fundamentally function the same way, but function slightly differently. So Winston is Disruption, and he can also Bodyguard, because the way Winston creates space and denies the enemy team damage is by diving on the people he's really good at damaging, not off a cliff, preferably. That's slightly suboptimal. You jump on the person that you're good at killing, the Widowmaker, the whatever, the Soldier, the McCree. You jump on these people, you jump on just their supports, and then you start making life difficult for them. And then, when you think that the enemy team's going to turn on you, you just leave. And that's how Winston creates space and denies them damage, by just being a nuisance. He jumps on the people, and then he forces them to pay attention to him. He makes the enemy team panic, and demands some kind of reaction from them, because he can't just ignore the Winston, because he's gonna kill the Mercy or the Ana or whatever. But Winston can be played another way, also, because typically Winston gets picked to counter something on the enemy team, because he counters certain heroes very strongly, like he counters Widowmaker very solidly, Hanzo very solidly, Genji very solidly. So, if you're picking for Widowmaker or Hanzo, your primary goal is going to be like, jump into them. If you're just picking Winston for whatever reason, it's like jump on their backline and make life difficult for the backline. But you can play Winston like a Bodyguard as well. Because, imagine they've got a Genji. Winston counters Genji. You, rather than jumping into the enemy team actively and looking to disrupt them, you're keeping an eye on the flankers instead. You're sitting with your backline and you're protecting them. You see, oh, here comes the Genji, here comes the Tracer, whatever. You put the bubble around the person that they're trying to bully, and then you bully them instead. And then suddenly, they can't do it. Winston does also counter Tracer, but not in the respect that Winston will counter Tracer because he'll kill her, because, assuming equal skill, the Tracer should win 100 times out of 100. But Winston denies the Tracer space, because Winston can kill Tracer quite quickly, because she's quite fragile. So, although he'll never win a straight-up fight with Tracer, if Winston is sat next to the Mercy, the Tracer has to respect the fact Winston is next to the Mercy. She has to respect the fact that if she's going to kill the Mercy, she has to execute it really well, or you're just going to drive her away, because you will kill her quickly. And you will make it difficult because the bubble's in the way, you're going to be hopefully body blocking, and you'll kill the Tracer quickly. So she has to respect you and your zone of threat. Because, again, Winston's zone of threat isn't really huge, and it's not massively threatening. He doesn't do as much damage as Reinhardt, so Winston doesn't threaten as many people. Like, Reaper, couldn't care less about a Winston. No threat to a Reaper at all. Soldier, not really, because Biotic Field kind of nulls out Winston's damage entirely. So Winston doesn't threaten the same amount of people as Reinhardt because he does less damage, so his zone is less threatening. But his zone is very threatening to people like Genji and Tracer, and so that's how you zone people off as Winston. You threaten certain people very harshly, and then you are very good at disrupting other people. Deva is largely the same way, but she does not have the same bodyguarding component that Winston does, because she's less consistent than Winston is. Winston, he's gonna hit the Genji, he's gonna hit the Tracer, there's nothing they can do to stop that other than not be in range of Winston. Deva has a baseline aim requirement, and she doesn't really do that much damage unless you're great at tracking. The micro-missiles do help that a little bit, but overall, Deva isn't super threatening by herself. Deva, she's good at diving on people still. Like, you see the Soldier, the McCree, the Soldier, the Widow, whatever, up on high ground. Same job as Winston, you go up there and you make life difficult for that person. But she doesn't have the bodyguarding component that Winston has, because she can't sit next to a Mercy and threaten a Genji in the same way that a Winston can. However, Deva also has the damage denial component in Defense Matrix. Now, this is much harder since they nerfed the duration massively, but she's very good at denying damage as a result, because as long as it's a projectile, she stops it. And she can get to a person very quickly because she has the boosters, and Defense Matrix doesn't really look like it from Deva's perspective, but it actually goes really far. So, Deva controls space and denies damage by diving on people and just making life difficult for them, because even though she's not as consistent as Winston, she does still demand a response, because otherwise the Mercy will die eventually, that kind of thing. But then suddenly you see Pharah coming, and Pharah's making life difficult for somebody in the back line, you just start eating the missiles that are coming at the Mercy. And you just, like, tap it, and you eat the missiles that are coming at them. You see what looks like Tracer coming up, and you think the Tracer's got Pulse Bomb, you're like, oh, no, I'm just gonna hold this over for Mercy for a second, then you deny that ultimate. And that's what Deva's defense matrix is really strong. It denies certain ultimates entirely like that. And doesn't deny certain ultimates as well as it used to. Like, it used to just completely null out, say, Tack Visor or Death Blossom. Doesn't do that anymore. But you give the team more time. Because defense matrix, assuming it's full, is 2 seconds in total. So, imagine Reaper pops out right next to you and your team and starts spinning. Mercy's right there, she's gonna die really quickly, but you hold defense matrix over that Reaper for 2 seconds, that should give the Mercy plenty of time to run away. And then you deny the Reaper the damage, you deny him the kill. Theoretically, anyway. And then Self-Destruct is one of the best zoning ultimates in the game. It has very limited offensive capabilities. Throwing it into the enemy team usually amounts to not much, unless comboed with certain other ultimates like Graviton or Earth Shatter. Or if suppose you've got a soldier, he wants to use Tack Visor, you throw Self-Destruct on the other team, on the other side of the team, suddenly they have to decide what they're going to look at. So it's limited offensive capabilities, but it is a very strong defensive zoning ultimate. Because, imagine, you hear Genji pull out Dragon Blade. Nope. I just put my ult down right next to the team. Suddenly, Genji has to respect the fact that I have put Self-Destruct down here, because if he doesn't, he dies. No questions asked. So, bare minimum, he has to waste some duration on Dragon Blade, just hiding and waiting for Self-Destruct to end. Best case scenario, he dashes in on somebody, you ult, and then doesn't have his dash to run away, suddenly has to start running away from the ultimate, you end up actually killing him and denying the Dragon Blade entirely. Similarly, you hear, like, Lucio uses Sound Barrier, you just go, nope, and you just ult right in the path they're gonna go through, and even though they got the Sound Barrier, they're like, I can't just run past Self-Destruct, so now I have to decide, do I keep going, or do I give up this momentum? So this is how Deva denies space, by being threatening, but also by having one of the best damage denial abilities in the game, and a very strong zoning ultimate. And that's how all of the tanks control space and deny damage to the enemy team, basically. There is slightly more to it than that, but this is what baseline all of the heroes are trying to do. Reinhardt, I find, is the most commonly misunderstood one, because they want to swing the hammer, because it feels good. You get in there and you swing the hammer on people, oh, it just feels good to hit them. And you build up your Earth Shatter really fast, you go in there, no. Reinhardt's strength is not the damage he does. It's in the fact that he has the best defensive, well, theoretically he has the best ability to protect his team, at least on paper. So, you shouldn't, the moral of the story with all of the tanks is, you shouldn't be worrying about doing damage, you should be worrying about tanking damage. You're meant to take damage and control space so that your teammates, your squishier teammates, don't have to take damage. And you control the space so that they are less threatened. You're meant to tank for your team, because you're a tank. All of the tanks tank damage. Even Roadhog. It's just less obvious how he does it. Even if you're playing Reinhardt and you can swing at someone in a fight, honestly, like, most of the time, it's still better to just hold your shield up. Because your soldier, he's got a shield. That soldier, he doesn't have a shield. Your soldier can't lose the fight because he can't take damage. It's basically that simple. So, that's how all of the tanks function in basic terms, and how they control space and deny the enemy team damage. So, thank you very much for watching if you did. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'm more than happy to answer, and I hope you found the video helpful.